everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Patience. So today we are going to be making this beautiful high-low asymmetric ruffle hem dress with a balloon sleeve. So before we get started, kindly click the subscribe button. If you have done that, let's get into it. So I'll be using this beautiful fabric for this tutorial, and this is about 3 yards. And I'll also be drafting on this pattern paper. So I'll be drafting the front piece on this pattern paper, and first I'll mark my shoulder line. And from my shoulder line, I'll mark 8 inches, that is half of my armhole measurement. So after doing that, the next measurement I will mark is my shoulder to bust point, which is 10.5 inches. And the next measurement I'll take is my shoulder to waist measurement, which is 17 inches. So I'll mark 17 inches and I'll add ½ inch that I will use to join to the lower part of the dress, that is 17.5 inches. Now this is my chest line, my bust line, and my waistline, and of course this is my shoulder line. So the next measurement I'll take is my shoulder measurement. My shoulder measurement is 16 inches divided by 2 is 8 inches, and I'll add ½ inch, that is 8.5 inches. And from the 8.5 inches I'll come down by 1 inch for my shoulder slant. And now I'll bring down the 8.5 inches on the chest line and I'll connect the points. After doing that, I'll mark the midpoint of this line, which is 4 inches. And for the front armhole, I'll come in by 3/4 inch. And for the back armhole, I'll come in by ½ inch. So for the front armhole, I'll mark the 3/4 inch to the edge of the shoulder this way. I'll make a slant line and I'll curve my armhole. So I'll be adding a dart on this dress. So I need my bust span measurement, which is the distance from one nipple to another. Mine is 8 inches divided by 2 is 4 inches, and I'll add ½ inch, that is 4.5 inch. So I'll mark the 4.5 inches on my waist and on the bust line. On the bust line, I'll come down by 1 inch. And I'll make sure it is at the 4.5 inches. So I'll connect this point to this point. And I'll be using 1 inch for my dart. If you like, you can use 1.5 inch for your dart. So I'll be using 1 inch for my dart. So I'll mark ½ inch on both sides and create my dart. So after doing that, I will be taking my circumference measurements. So my bust circumference is 42 inches divided by 4 is 10.5 inches. And I'll be adding ½ inch for ease, that is 11 inches. You don't have to do that, but I'll add ½ inch, that is 11 inches. And I'll mark 1 inch for side seam allowance. And I'll mark the same measurement on the bust line. My waist circumference is 36 inches divided by 4 is 9 inches. I'll add this 1 inch for that is 10 inches. So I'll mark 10 inches and I'll add 1 inch for side seam allowance. And now for the neck, I'll be using 4.5 inches for the width of the neck. And I'll be using 5.5 inches for the depth of the neck. So I'll make a curve this way and I'll add ½ inch on the shoulder line for joining allowance. So that is it. I'll cut it out. So that is it for the front piece. I marked the dart on both sides of the front piece, and I'll do the same on my fabric. So that is it for the front piece. Now for the back piece, I've gone ahead to mark 1 inch for my zipper allowance, and I've marked my shoulder line also. Now on the shoulder line, I'll mark half of my shoulder measurement, which is 8.5 inches. And from the 8.5 inches, I'll come down by 1 inch and slant my shoulder. After doing that, I'll mark half of my armhole measurement, which is 8 inches. And then I'll mark my shoulder to bust point, which is 10.5 inches. And I'll mark my shoulder to waist, which is 17.5 inches. And I'll mark my back half length, which is 15 inches. So this is my shoulder line, my chest line, my bust line, back half length, and my waist line. So I'll bring down this 8.5 inches on the chest line, and I'll connect the points this way. Then I'll mark the midpoint, which is 4 inches, and I'll come in by ½ inch, make a slant to the edge of the shoulder this way, and I'll create my armhole. And I'll also mark my bust span measurement on the waistline and on the bust line. And I'll come down by 1 inch from the bust line, and I'll connect it this way. I'll also be using 1 inch for my dart, so I'll mark ½ inch on both sides and create my darts. So now I'll be taking my circumference measurement. My bust circumference is 42 divided by 4 is 10.5. I added ½ inch, that is 11 inches. So I'll add 1 inch for side seam allowance, and I'll take the same measurement on the bust line. And my waist circumference is 36 divided by 4 is 9 inches. I'll add this 1 inch for darts, that is 10 inches, and I'll add 1 inch for side seam allowance. So to avoid zip bulge on my back half length line, I'll come in by ½ inch. You can come in by 3/4 inch, depends on how deep your back is. So I'll come in by ½ inch, and I'll make a slant from the ½ inch this way. So I'll be using 4.5 inches for the width of the neck. Remember, I started my measurement from the 1 inch on the zip line. So for the depth of the neck, I will be using 3 inches. So I'll make a curve this way, and I'll add ½ inch on the shoulder line for joining allowance, and I'll cut it out. So this is my back piece, and remember, I am still going to mark my 1 inch for zipper allowance. So that is it for the back piece. So for the lower part of the dress, I have a video on how to draft this. I'll put the link on the description box below. This is the front piece and this is the back piece. So I'm using 20 inches on the lower part, and on the waist I added ½ inch that I'll use to join to the upper part of the dress. And I have marked my waist to hip measurement, which is 9 inches. So this is the front piece, and I want the high to be on the left side and the low on the right side. So it depends on how you want it. So from the hip line, I'll come up by 2 inches. You can come up by 3, you can go down by 2, or you can start from the hip line, depends on how you want it. So from the 2 inches above, I'll make a curve to the edge of the hemline this way. And then I'll cut it out. So as you can see, this part is now 7 inches. So that is it for the front piece. So I used the front piece as a pattern to cut out the back piece. So what I did was I used a masking tape to hold down the 1 inch for zipper allowance before I traced out the back piece. So I'm just going to remove it. So if you are tracing on your fabric, make sure the front piece is traced on the right side and the back piece on the wrong side. So this L is the high side and the R is the low side. So I've gone ahead to trace it on my fabric. This is the front piece and I've marked the dart on the front piece. I'll take in the dart and I also cut out a facing for the neck. So I'll go ahead and pin it down and also 1/2 inch on the neck. So this is the back piece. I've also traced it out, as you can see. So I've also cut out a facing for the neck. I'm just going to align it, good sides together, and I'll pin it down. I'll be sewing by 1/2 inch. And I've also marked the dart, so I'll be taking in the dart. So also on the lower parts, I've traced it out and I've marked my dart. As you can see, I'll take in my darts, and also on the back piece, this is the 1 inch for zipper allowance, and I've also marked my dart. And I'll take in my dart. Now I have done all that. So on the back piece, I didn't finish up the neckline. I stopped at the 1 inch for zipper allowance. I'm going to attach my zip first before I finish up the neckline. So that is it. So I'll divide the lower part of the back piece into 2. And now I'll be joining the back piece together, the upper and the lower part. So I'll place good sides together this way. I'll make sure I align the dart. I'll pin it down and sew by 1/2 inch. Also on the front piece, I'll be joining the lower part and the upper part together. So I'll place the right sides together this way. And I'll make sure I align the dart and I'll sew by 1/2 inch. So I have done that, and I ensure the darts are aligned. Also on the back piece, I ensure the darts are aligned. So this is it. So after doing that, the next thing I'm going to do is to mark where I want my zip to stop. That is 20 inches. I've marked that already, and from the 20 inches, I'll stitch it down on the 1 inch for zipper allowance. So I've done that already, and this is how it came out. So after doing that, the next thing I'm going to do is to attach my zip. So I'll place good side of the zip on good side of the fabric on the 1 inch for zipper allowance. I'll pin it down one side of the zip and I'll turn it this way and pin the other side. And when I'm stitching it, I'll make sure this waist area is aligned. After doing that, I'll be joining the front and the back piece together. So I'll first join the shoulders together. I'll turn it this way. I'll make sure I align it and I'll pin it down and sew by 1/2 inch. So I'll be using the rest of the fabric for the ruffles on the lower part. The total length is 18 inches. So I'll be using 16 inches for the ruffles, and I'll use ½ inch on this part to join to the upper part, and I'll use 2.5 inches to hem the lower part of the dress. So the total gown length is 52 inches. I will use the longest stitch on my sewing machine to sew on ½ inch all through the remaining fabric. That is about 108 inches. So I have attached the zip, and I ensure these parts are aligned, and I've also joined the shoulders, as you can see. So the next thing I am going to do is to finish up the neckline. I'm just going to open it up this way and finish up the neckline, and I'll sew on top of the zip and cut out the excess zip. After doing that, I'm going to stitch the facing close to the teeth of the zip, and I'm going to use a hemming gum on the facing. After doing that, I'll join the front and the back side seam together. So I'll align it this way. I'll make sure the waists are aligned. I'll pin it down, and I'll sew on the 1 inch for side seam allowance. So I've done that, and this is how it came out. So after doing that, the next thing I'm going to do is to attach the ruffles on the lower part. So I'm going to measure it first. So what I have is 51 inches. So for you to know the amount of ruffles you will gather, you can multiply the 51 inches by 2.5 or 3 inches, depends on how full you want it. So this is my ruffles. I've gathered it, and I'll make sure it is 51 inches. And I left 1 inch on both sides. So I'll place good sides together this way, and I'll sew on the 1 inch. And I'll also sew on ½ inch around the gathers. So I've done that, as you can see. And the next thing I'm going to do is to join the gathers to the dress. So I'm going to place the right sides together, and I'll align the zipper area and the 1 inch I joined on the ruffles. I'll align it together. I'll pin it down, and I'll sew by ½ inch. So I have done that, and this is how it came out. So the next thing I'm going to do is to attach the sleeve. So, and I've gone ahead to cut out the sleeve. So I have a video on how to draft a basic sleeve. I'll put the link on the description box below. All you need to do is to determine how wide you want the wrist, and then you connect it to the bicep line. So the length of this sleeve is 25 inches. I'll be using 1.5 inch as the casing for the elastic. So I left 1 inch for side seam allowance. I'll sew on the 1 inch, and I'll fold the 1.5 inch on the hemline for the casing for the elastic, and I'll attach my sleeve. So I've done that. I've attached the sleeve. So I left 1 inch space that I will use to pass through my elastic. So I'll determine how tight I want the elastic, and then I'll use a safety pin this way to pass it through. So after doing that, I'll stitch the elastic and I'll sew back the 1 inch space I left. So this is how beautiful it came out. I've stitched back the 1 inch space I left to pass my elastic. So I decided to cut out the 2.5 inches on the hemline, and I serge all through. So we have come to the end of this tutorials, guys. If this was helpful, kindly give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe and also turn on the notification bell to be updated when I upload a new video. Thank you guys for watching. Bye.